Gibbo presents.
On Saturday, March 2nd, Taranchyla will return to New York, the city he once called home, when Poison Dart will square off with Blunt Posse and Earth Ruler at March Madness. I recently spoke to Mr. Mad Spider himself to preview the upcoming clash. I began by asking if he listened to the audio of Earth Ruler's recent defeats to King Addies.
Yes, I listened to the audio. I did.
And what did you make of Earth Ruler's performance?
Earth Ruler didn't essentially play bad. They just didn't play good enough. They were overmatched. They were outmatched. Addies just basically played a perfect dance, in that setting. They would have been hard to beat by a lot of sounds. It's the way they played that night. They would have been tough to beat by anybody. So it was a situation of there wasn't really much Earth Ruler could do, given the circumstances. They did the best they could at that time, but it just wasn't good enough. They were outmatched. It wasn't even close, right? Like, to use a basketball analogy, it's like putting Steve Nash to guard LeBron James. It makes, it's a mismatch. It's a mismatch. There's only so much Steve Nash would be able to do. You have to foul him. And even if you foul him, you still couldn't stop him from scoring, It's one of those things.
Do you expect Earth Ruler to adopt a different approach and play totally differently on March 2nd?
Yes, I expect them because it's going to be a different dance, different environment. The crowd is going to be a bit smaller. It's going to be a more intimate, up close with your fans environment than, in Pulse 48. You know what I mean? Different sound system. So your ears, it's going to be different to your ears. The sound, everything of the dance is going to be different. So when you have different energy, it's a different performance.
How important is it to think about how your opponents may play in the lead up to a clash? Is it something you should spend a lot of time considering, or is it more beneficial to just concentrate on how you will play?
It depends on the sound that you're playing against. You have sounds that are a lot more aggressive in nature. They tend to bring the clash to you. So you have to then think about what they're doing and then analyze proper counters, to their advances. And then you have other sounds that are more counter-punching type of sounds. So you have to focus more on what you do, so you don't slip up and get knocked out. So that being said, it's kind of like you have to do both. I wouldn't say you do one more so than the other. You kind of have to do both. It just depends on the matchup. As they often say in boxing, styles make fights.
Do your skills on the microphone give you the edge in this clash?
I would like to think they give me the edge in every clash, but it all boils down to the crowd that's standing in front of you. That's how the game is. You know what I mean? To use another basketball analogy, I can be a great shooter, but it all depends on what I step into the arena that night. If my shots don't go in, they don't go in. So it's just, it really depends on that night. I would like to think I have that edge in every clash. But, it's not always 110% the case. But I will go in confident in my own abilities.
Let's say everything is equal musically on March 2nd. Do you feel your wittiness and intelligence on the microphone could be the X factor which leads to a Poison Dart victory?
Yeah. I have that much confidence in my ability to say, I think so.
It's certainly dangerous going into a battle if you're not confident of your own abilities and you don't think you can win.
Precisely. So, yeah, I definitely feel that way.
New tunes have played an important role in some recent clashes, including King Addies versus Earth Ruler. Do you feel they will play an equally important role on March 2nd?
I wouldn't necessarily say new tunes will play an important role. It's well-cut new tunes. Addies' new tunes were well-cut. That's why they made such an impact. They couldn't just play like any new song and, get a huge following. Their songs were well-cut. So whether they're new tunes or old tunes or recent tunes, as long as they're well-cut, they're going to make an impact.
So I'm guessing the Poison Dart dub box or Serato folder is fully loaded with well-cut new tunes?
Indeed. You just have to wait till March 2nd to find out.
What tactics do you feel Blunt Posse will try and employ on the night?
Blunt is not exactly a predictable sound. So, as far as tactics are concerned, it's very interesting. They're a sound that adjusts well. During the course of clashes, they adjust well, they improvise well. So you can't expect them to come in with a specific game plan and say, okay, that's going to be what it is. Blunt is they're more of a counter-punching kind of sound. So regardless of whether or not, they appear to be aggressive, they're basically leading you so that you can slip up, and that's what they capitalize on, your slip up. So tactics, as far as that's concerned, it's hard. It's a little difficult to read that. That's one of those things you're going to find out in the dance that you go through. This clash is going to be a clash of adjustments. Adjustments and improvisation. In my opinion, it's going to boil down to, the heat of the night.
Some people feel Blunt Posse have been overlooked or ignored as of late when it comes to involvement in clashes, although they have just been announced as part of the lineup for Brooklyn Massacre. Do you agree that they have been overlooked? And if you agree, do you think that they will have a point to prove?
Anytime you set foot into a clash as a sound system, you have a point to prove. So that essentially is a given point. As far as them being overlooked, I wouldn't necessarily say that. But they're at the stage where they have fans that like them, and they have haters just like the rest of us. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're being overlooked. But they'll definitely have a point to prove. As will I, as will everyone.
I understand every sound has a point to prove each time they step into the arena, but there must be certain times when you feel extra motivation to really stamp your authority and make people take notice.
Understandable. Well, in that case, to parallel it to boxing, they haven't fought in a while. So, them stepping back into the arena, they're essentially, they're going to want to prove that they're still batting. They don't want to prove that, the training that they've been doing off the air, has been working, and, they're just basically ready to run over everything. Because Dunn has been out of the arena for a little while. They've been kind of quiet, which is good. You never want to overexpose yourself. So, to parallel it to boxing, yeah, they haven't fought in a while. So, they're going to come in ready to prove to the world that they still have it.
You mentioned overexposure there. Ideally, how often do you think a sound should clash?
To be honest with you, the frequency of clashes is almost secondly important to the magnitude of each clash you participate in. Because you can clash quite often, have small skirmishes here and there, and, everywhere, but long as you want, just as long as you're cutting June and, staying up to the time. The problem is when you stay out of the arena and you're not voicing, and then you come back in and you try to play catch up. It never works. Another thing that fuels the clash industry essentially is rivalries. And that's one thing that's not as prevalent in the business as it once was. Is rivalries between sound systems. That essential, whether it's who runs a specific turf or who's the better sound in this particular region, those rivalries aren't as prevalent as they used to be. And part of that is due to the way, I guess the way dancehall has essentially changed in essence. Because nowadays when you look at these dance flyers, it's like, the dancers, they tend to be more about the promoter than the sounds nowadays. So it's kind of hard, to build that kind of a rivalry in that regard. But it's slowly coming full circle, to that environment again. It's slowly coming back.
Are sounds reluctant to get involved in rivalries?
I don't think so. It's just that the way the industry is set up now, it's, especially with the advent of the internet and audio being prevalent and dubplates being sold wholesale and, people basically shopping their dubplates around. It's not like one time. It's like boxing without weight classes. You essentially need weight classes, and basically a system, like a tier system of sorts. And, you sound in a particular tier, and then that's when the rivalries will build. You'll have sounds that, the people feel shouldn't be in the top tier, and then you'll have sounds that feel like they shouldn't be in the bottom tier, and that's when the fireworks start.
If we can go back to last summer and your clash with King Addies in New York. At the end of the clash, you walked out, as you felt you had outclassed Addies. Do you still feel this was the right move to make at the time?
Well, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have done it the same way. That particular move, I would have made the same way. There are other things in the dance that I would have done differently, but that particular move I would have done, essentially the same way. Because that was, like I explained in the interview that I did at the headquarters, that was basically the mitigating factor. There was little to no objection. There wasn't really an objection at all when we walked out. The only objection came from, obviously, our opponents, which I can't blame them for objecting. If I were in their position, I probably would have done the same.
Is walking out something you would do again if you found yourself in a similar situation?
That's something that you can't really answer until you're in the moment, essentially. So I can't say, I would walk out again, or no, I wouldn't. It's just one of those things, That's when you're in that moment,
Walking out leaves some of the people who have paid to watch your clash feeling like they haven't got their money's worth. Does this concern you?
That's a valid question, but in that particular instance, I wouldn't say so. I would say the band the clash starting later than it should have would, shorten the amount of musical content for the people's money, so to speak. I wouldn't necessarily say walking out, I wouldn't say walking out would have done that. It's not something that I practice commonly, so it's not a behavior that I'll actually sit here and attempt to justify. I just felt like it was the thing to do in that particular situation.
Although you originally hail from New York, Poison Dart is a Florida-based sound. So you're giving away home court advantage coming to Brooklyn to clash two New York-based sounds. Does this bother you? Do you have to put on a flawless performance to avoid a hometown decision?
Not at all. It doesn't bother me. The aim would be to put on a flawless performance regardless, but it doesn't bother me. A lot of people have this stigma about New York that they're biased for New York sounds, when actually that's a lot further from the truth. I remember at the time when the same New York crowd used to be quote-unquote biased more toward Jamaica sounds than the New York sounds that they were clashing against. So I don't see there being any form of hometown advantage. You know, so to speak, it's just a situation of playing for the people in front of you. And as long as you manage to do that, you'll be just fine.
Have the New York crowds changed at all since when you were a young man learning the trades in the Big Apple?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's changed quite a bit. The crowds now are essentially more, the crowds and clashes now are more soundmen. You know, they're more soundmen in the audience, more industry people. You know, because during the late 90s into the early 2000s, you had this mass exodus of fans taking up various occupations in the business. So they essentially became part of the business, and there are actually very few casual fans left. You know what I mean? So nowadays, the majority of people you see in a sound clash audience are actually part of the industry. You know, it's kind of like the battle rap circuit. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with those Slack DVDs and those things, but it's like the battle rap circuit where the majority of people in the audience are rappers. So it's one of those kind of things. It's almost like you're being judged by your peers.
Could that be because it's easier to become a soundman today? Perhaps in the past, many of the people who attended clashes would have liked to have been a soundman, but it wasn't as easy then as buying a laptop and ordering a few dub plates online.
Yeah, I would say that contributed to it. You know, it's a bit more, dub plates cost a lot more than they used to, but the links that, you need to get dub plates are more available now than they were, back when I first started. Because back then, there were only a few select people who had these kind of contacts, who had relationships with the artists, with the dub studios, and those things. So, it was a select few people, so it was harder to get in terms of links. Nowadays, if you have the money, you can get in. You can find someone on Facebook. Good luck with that. You might not always get what you pay for, but you can find someone on Facebook.
Clash crowds being made up of mainly soundmen. Is this a characteristic that only exists in New York, or is it the same across the states and around the world?
It's across the states and around the world. What you tend to find is the smaller the crowd, the higher percentage of industry people in the audience. The larger the crowd, like a world clash, so to speak, then you get the casual fans or the fans of the actual brand world clash, or fans of specific sound systems, or those things. So you find that all around. You find that all around the world, no matter where you go.
Is the taste and musical preference of the New York crowds different to elsewhere?
The tastes vary quite a bit. The specific tastes in music vary, but there are certain elements that types of clash fans. You have the fan who basically gives their forward based upon what's being played, like, the actual tune, if the tune is a big tune or whatever the case, or if it's a new tune, what's being played. Then you have the fan who basically gives a forward on how it's being played, how the tune is mixed, the rhythms that are chosen, the voice on, how the selector is mixing the songs, one to the other, how the MC speeches are tying into the songs, basically the vibe that they're creating. I myself am that kind of fan. And then you have what I feel is the worst kind of fan. And this is the fan that gives forward based upon what everybody else around them is doing. So essentially, they're not really listening to what the sound is playing or how they're playing. They're just scanning the crowd, seeing if they're getting a forward. And if they're getting a forward from other people, then they'll give them a forward. So when you put these three types of fans together in a dance, standing next to each other, they're having a conversation. It basically turns out like the first type of fan will say, "Come on, boys, nothing is on song. Go on." And then the second type will be like, "Yeah, courtesy, I think it's one of the rest of the speech, connect, already get shot on the end of my blog." And then the third fan will sit there and be like, "I hear that sound, that man, I'm on the crowd, they're not supposed to kiss. It's not going with that man, I hear that sound." So what happens is, as a selector going into a clash, you essentially have to find the best way to determine as early as possible what the concentration is of each type of fan and then play accordingly. And even though their musical tastes differ from region to region, those three archetypes are essentially the same, no matter where you go.
These days, you're a man with a lot on your plates. How do you manage to fit in clash preparation with being an artist, a producer, and your juggling dates?
That right there is a very daunting task. It's extremely difficult. It's getting more and more difficult as time goes on. I'm basically doing my best to manage. Clashing is something that I enjoy at times. And I'm still a fan of the sport. So it's a situation where I'm basically going to balance them as long as I possibly can, and then eventually I'm going to get to the crossroad where I'm going to have to make a choice. And when I make that choice, the world will find out.
When you get booked for a clash, do you still feel the same excitement and buzz that you did in the past?
No. I'd be lying if I told you, yeah. No, I don't. Essentially it depends on the clash, but I don't feel that same excitement and buzz, I'm getting older now, so you start looking at a lot of things differently, you know what I mean? But I don't get that same excitement just as soon as I hear the booking. It depends on the clash, of course. Certain clashes, you're like, yeah, this is going to be fun. But for the most part, I can't say that I have the same reaction. I'd be lying if I said that.
Does making music give you more of a buzz these days than clashing?
I honestly enjoy creating music. I enjoy making it more so than playing it. I can honestly say that. So, in essence, yeah. I get more of a buzz off of that. But at the same time, clashing is a sport that I belong to. And it's gotten me a lot of exposure over the years. You know what I mean? So I have an obligation. I have an obligation to it to a certain extent. And I still have that respect for the sport. Even if I don't love it as much as I used to as a kid, I still have the respect for it. So when I go into a match, I still give it my 100%.
How much longer do you think you will be clashing for?
That is a question that I cannot answer. I could look at you and say,
Will you wake up one day and just know it's time to retire from clashing? Or is it a decision that you will have to make after much consideration over weeks or months?
It's a gradual consideration. It's not one of those cut and dry, kind of decisions. It's a gradual consideration. And then at the same time, as the artist and production career picks up more and more and more, then there's like less time available. So all of those things get put together in a pot, you stir it up, let it boil down the gravy, and then you decide.
Will retiring from clashing hurt the music making side of things, as you will lose the exposure it provides you? Or are you well enough known already that this won't be an issue?
Well, the thing is that in the Soundclash community as an artist, I have a very, very decent rapport with a lot of the active and participating sound systems at all levels, top tier, middle tier, lower tier, however you want to describe them. I have a good rapport with, basically all of them, from doing the plates and so on and so forth. So it won't necessarily hurt my actual standing unless the quality of my music drops. Then that would actually hurt my standing. But as far as, not participating as a selector anymore, I don't necessarily foresee that hurting, the brand, so to speak. I don't see that hurting the brand.
How far out from a clash is it when you really switch into quote-unquote game modes?
That, usually, like, it's a gradual progression, and then, like, the weeks leading up to it, like the 2-3 week period leading up to it, you start to really get into gear, and that also depends on the clash itself, like who's the clashing, the more intense the rivalry or the more intense the competition, the more further away you start switching into gear. I'll take this particular clash for example. I have recording projects that I've put on hold to prepare for this clash. That's basically the best way I can say, how far away it takes to switching to gear. I have recording projects and rhythm releases and song releases that I've essentially put on hold to prepare for this upcoming Clash March Madness.
It's clear from that answer that you're not taking Blunt Posse or Earth Ruler lightly, and that although clashing doesn't give you the same buzz it used to when you are involved in a clash, you focus on it fully and make it your number one priority.
Well, the thing is, like I said, I still have, although the love for the sport isn't the same as it once was, like I said, the respect for the sport, the respect and commitment to the sport is still essentially the same. So, when the clash does come up, it's like, okay, let's do it. You know what I mean? You just lock in, you focus, you do whatever it takes to win, and then when the clash is over, it's over. On to the next challenge. So, it doesn't, I don't necessarily have that spark initially, but as time goes on and it gets closer to the actual date, the focus kicks in. It's almost like muscle memory, Once a soldier, always a soldier. You may not be excited about going to war as much as you once were when you first started, but when wartime comes, you switch into that mode and you know what to do.
Explain, if you could, what goes through your minds on the day of a clash.
Basically, everybody has a different ritual. I'm sure. It's just like an athlete, preparing for a match, so to speak. You try to block out the crowd noise, you try to block out all distractions, whatever it is that's rigid. You know, you have to be adaptable. Because Clash is a really topsy-turvy kind of sport. You know, it goes off tangents often.
Do you know what the formats of March Madness will be? Rounds, length of rounds, rules?
I'm not aware of it currently. You know, I'm not aware of it currently. Not aware of it. I'm going to, I don't like to prognosticate much, but I'm going to guess and say that we're probably going to be doing 20-minute rounds. You know, because with 3 sounds, 20-minute rounds is optimal. Because you keep the crowd's attention. They can hear all 3 sounds in the same hour. You know, so it'll keep the dance from dragging on, so to speak. You know what I mean? So I have a feeling we'll be starting off with 20-minute rounds. I don't know where it's going to go from there, or what the point system is. If there is a point system, I have no clue. I don't know. I'm sure as it gets closer to the dance or the thing, I'll find out.
Lastly, tell me and the people listening what to expect on March 2nd.
Expect a show. Expect a straight up show. You know, 3 good sounds, you know, with lots of music. You know, so you're gonna hear a little bit of everything. You know, you have 3 good MCs, so a little bit of everything is gonna be said. You know, so basically, expect the show. Expect the show.
Thanks a lot for your time, Taranchyla. I appreciate you making an exception to your rule of not doing pre-clash interviews. Best of luck at March Madness.
Much respect, Gibbo. March 2nd, March Madness, Tech Nine and Guy Famous Promotion. What's not Blunt Posse, Earthwell, Albany Manor. Sounds like the last at Y2K. That'll be a great night. See you there.
Gibbo.